microphone.
Hello. Thank you for coming, so many. It must be really daunting out there on the other side.
And you found it, because I first didn't find the auditorium, so. I think we should just dive right in, because I heard we only have 45 minutes. So we will try to get as much information out of you, Olafur, as we can. I'm sure I hope everybody saw the little sun, which is here on display. And actually here in Miami, there's a beautiful small exhibition at Young Arts. It's the old Bacardi factory. And Olafur designed a kiosk as a prototype, as a kiosk. And why don't you quickly describe if you are still able to take something in, and if you are still mobile enough to get there. Do you want to quickly say what our guests would see there?
Yeah, so at the Young Arts, which are just, I believe, about to open this old Bacardi building, which Frank Gehry has been renovating with them, which is a really amazing, a fantastic old building from how old is it?
Wow.
70s. But anyway, so I'm fortunate to be sort of on display there, and it's the project which I am in fact also very lucky to show at the booth of the Bayerle Foundation, which I think is called C31. It's the Bayerle booth anyway. So and the little sun, I should just quickly show it to you, and then I think we should maybe start talking about something more general, and then we can maybe get back to this also. But anyway, this is the project, and I'm going to torture you a little bit with this, because we're actually selling it at the Bayerle booth for $30. So you think of it as an unlimited edition of a work of art. And maybe we can get back to it, but there's a larger display of this project at the Young Arts, which is down on what avenue? Do you remember?
I don't know numbers and addresses. I'm so happy I found.
You might know Young Arts, which is a legendary institution here in America, which has worked for quite a while together with HBO, making these programs about younger artists, and has really been among the sort of initiatives that has supported the very young artists. And of course, I'm incredibly thankful for being associated with people who are so young. and in that sense, it's a fantastic, it's a fantastic place to be a part of. But anyway, yes, so welcome to this talk. Incredible that you're all here. There's, we should definitely say something interesting. Having all these people.
Now expectations are rising. I remember when you were a very young artist. The first time you and I worked with each other on a major work, because we have worked so often with each other. I was part of the curatorial team of your Museum of Modern Art retrospective, the traveling one. We green-colored in a kind of night action the river in Berlin, the Spree. So you had this incredible not poisonous color that we threw from the bridge into the water, and then so we have all of these different experiences. But the first one was in the mid-90s, and it was in a town you might have not heard of. It's Weimar. It's in eastern Germany. And you did the piece Beauty that we later, 20 years later, installed at MoMA. Beauty is a piece where you walk into a space and there is a rainbow. You walk into the space and it's first you see a rainbow and that's magical. And then you understand the rainbow is only there because there is a cloud. There is a fog cloud out of little water particles, and they're coming out of a water pipe. There basically is a little hole. I'm describing now the art, and I'm sure I'm totally wrong. But I remember in Weimar in the mid-90s, they didn't have the right water pipe, and somehow the water pipe, there must have been like gasoline or something. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was like smelling of petroleum in this rainbow, yeah.
It was like a gas station. So the first piece we ever did, they took the wrong pipe, and this amazingly poetic piece about nature and reconstructing nature, you walk in and you have this, Madeleine Greenstein, she always says, you have first this, wow, it's magic, and then you have an aha, you understand what it is. Oh, it's a pipe, and there's water coming out of the pipe, so you have the water particles in the space, a strong light, and you have a rainbow. Didn't work for us. You felt like you were walking into a car wash next to a gas station.
But so, it's good people turned off their cigarettes immediately.
Oh yes.
No, but I think it's only relevant to also say, in the context of sitting here today, that as a younger artist in the mid-90s, the reason why I was so obsessed with trying to do a rainbow was to celebrate the kind of dematerialization of the object as such. And of course, there had been a number of ideas, such as the famous book by Lucy Lippard, and generally leaning back into 70s and 60s. There's been a number of approaches, but I started art school late 80s, 89, actually, the week before the Berlin Wall fell. So, and as you might remember, some of you, the late 80s was very object-driven, and there was a kind of very strong sense of, let's say, the objecthood in art, and especially the scene out of America, out of New York. And I, being a young student in the early 90s, I was then very interested in to what extent could I, make something which, besides the dematerialization, also would encourage the sort of evaluation on what's the difference between standing here and standing there. And with a rainbow, I think it's very important to celebrate, even today, the fact that Klaus and I looks at the rainbow, but of course the eye, the drop, and the light is needed for a rainbow, meaning that Klaus's rainbow is not the same as my rainbow. So the idea that we are sort of having a plural situation, we are sharing an experience, but inside of the sharing we are seeing two different things. So we are both singular and plural. So in the 90s, this idea of you can actually be together and be unique at the same time, I thought was a relevant sort of idea, and that's why and of course then I thought the sort of idea of natural phenomena, or the cultivated natural phenomena, or the constructed natural, and so on and so forth. This was a sort of a nice setting of framework in which we could do this. And I think we shared that time in the early 90s as Klaus and I, as there was no material solidification out of the art market, in particular not in Berlin. And clearly I was very inspired also from, now we are in America, I was very inspired by Felix Gonzalez Torres or Katie Nolan and the people who sort of came after the late 80s, and I was like, still in art school, and even though I had a very different take on it, this idea of subjectivity became incredibly important, and that not just with me, but I think in the sort of little bit of a scene in Berlin in the early 90s became a very important element. So on one side it was a kind of element which came out of phenomenology, the role of the subject, but also very much about what type of political or activistic or sort of reconsidering the systems type of thinking would also be possible. And that's why this sort of gasoline wasn't so, funny enough, maybe I should do it now, a new version again, right? Because we live in very oily times. Maybe I was foresighted. Maybe it's a better piece.
Maybe it's more scary.
Yeah, but it's so predictable maybe, but...
I remember your first exhibitions, the great gallery in Berlin, Neuger Riemschneider. They had a very tiny storefront in Goethestraße in West Berlin, and it was literally a tiny storefront, like you have normally a tobacco shop or something. And I remember, and I'm sure I remember it the wrong way, there was one installation where there was a light pointing at something rotating and reflecting the light as a positive shadow onto the wall. And I had heard about Olafur, and Olafur in the early Berlin times, Berlin used to be so isolated, but then everybody wanted to be there, like when the wall fell. And so Olafur had the reputation to be this really esoteric guy from Iceland. You're not from Iceland, you're not esoteric, but so I'm coming into the gallery and so, yeah, great, high expectations, not convincing. And I actually, and then we did a studio visit, and I still, because somehow I couldn't get it together. And if I think about it now, so much of your work was already in these early pieces. And how important, and then a stranger thing, like 5 years later, I go to Iceland for the first time, and I think, oh, of course. And I know you're Danish, but would you say a little bit about Iceland and if that influenced your work?
Yeah, so just for the record, my parents are Icelandic, but I grew up in Denmark, going to Iceland on all vacations, Christmas, Easter, everything. So all the fun stuff was in Iceland, so like creativity, and all the sort of structure and school and work, so dematerialization and materialization, like Denmark and Iceland. So in that sense, Iceland became this sort of phantasmic place for me. But maybe I can start somewhere else, because when I moved to Berlin right around that time, one of the reasons for that was actually Tim Neuger and I had some beers. That was like 92 or 93, and I told Tim, you know what, Tim, I actually like, I actually don't like German artists. My God, I don't understand this Beuys guy or whatever he's. So I said, I like much more. I like, Robert Irwin, John McCracken, James Turrell, and I was really young and naive, of course, but I was truly inspired by the fact that these West Coast people, they were so confident about what they did was important. So I'm not sure I actually fully understood the sort of scope of what they did, but how on earth can they be so certain? So when I came to Berlin, I said, oh, bloody hell, I have to kind of pretend to be so certain also, right?
Oh, you did successfully, yes.
No, but so no matter what, I had to make something so it looked like I was totally convinced. And the good thing about that was that, so you mentioned this gallery, Tim and Burkhard Neuger-Riemsneider, they were so convinced. And I was like, why are they so convinced? And this is really funny, because I looked at the gallery and said, oh, they must be insane. Because I came from Copenhagen, and there was nothing such as radical. There's nothing really radical. And it was a great time, because nobody was going to even think about ever selling anything anyway. So that's sort of not even a part of the equation. So we might as well think about why we then do it. So the idea of radicalization was really, it was really so natural. It was not now, it's like, if you do something radical, it's like a big risk. Oh, it's all this risk, and then you end up with an art fair like this. Well, risk is really something you have to look for hours and hours in order to find something which is a little bit risky. So at the time, risk was the normality. We had risk for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. And doing the show, we changed the show even in the last minute, and we didn't even think that was strange, because we were so certain. So when I meet young artists, now we spoke about the young, this idea of certainty and this idea of just celebrating, not exactly knowing what you're doing, to the extent of course, also being sort of, how should I say, celebrating not knowing what you're doing. In order to celebrate, we also need to push things ahead. I mean, we also need to take some riskful steps. And sometimes that requires not knowing. And the luck for me, coming out of Denmark and Iceland, I said, okay, I better just be as Icelandic as possible. Bloody hell. Right? So I'll do a rainbow. And then I need somebody who trusts me. In this case, it was the gallery. In other cases, it was other people, like when you showed the ventilator at the Postforamt in Berlin. So this trust or the confidence was so important. And the reason why I ask about it here is that I think, of course, there are people today who are also taking risks or exposing confidence in younger art, but we need to treasure them. I mean, we need to celebrate them, the people who dare to kind of deviate from this sort of, the hegemony, is that what it's called? The kind of the system in which we, of course, all are incredibly, me too, is incredibly embedded into. So that was the times.
Are you avoiding my question about Iceland?
No, I thought I was answering it. Oh, I wasn't?
Not
but
really.
I was trying to say that I had to go away from Denmark and Iceland in order to do something which was, at the end of the day, very Scandinavian. It was funny. It was because I also realized, my God, the Germans, they're so good at what they are doing. So I met also Daniel Buchholz and all the artists around Daniel, and they were great. I realized, I will never succeed if I do the same that they do, because they're so good. and you know, they also is like great people, and so I said, oh fuck, I'll just do something which is totally me. But sitting in Denmark at the time at the academy, you always think, oh, I have to do something like they do in Germany, you know. And then when I went down there, that's why I'm trying to answer the question. I had to go away from Scandinavia in order to kind of connect with it.
I was just very impressed by Iceland. Iceland is, as you know, an island, and it's rather huge, but there are only 250,000 people, so it's like the population of a tenth of Brooklyn, or the whole country has a population of one area in Miami, so it's a whole country. And when I first went, I know 2 people in Iceland at the time. I know a singer from Iceland, and I know an artist from Iceland. And I said, wow, I know the perhaps 2 most famous people in Iceland, but then everybody is famous in Iceland. You can say, oh, that's the dentist, because it's like one little village. And of course, the dentist is as famous as you are, as famous as the most famous Icelandic singer is. So it's very impressive as an environment. And I remember all my friends are so cool. I can't ask them, will you give me a tour of Iceland? Because, of course, you can't do this because everybody's always visiting. And then, so I took a tourist bus and we went to this cliff. There was a waterfall, and the water fell, of course, that's the waterfall. And on the other side, all the particles of water, the fog, heavy fog, went up. And I thought, oh, wow, that's Iceland. The water is coming up and not down. And I was on the moss, thinking about your moss wall, and then you lie down on the moss, and it's actually warm from underneath. So I literally fell asleep, missed the tour bus, and then had to somehow hitchhike back to the city. But this moment of seeing the water come up, of having the light be reflected in the water, of having the moss that was warm, like thermo. So and then when you say you had to be Icelandic as possible, what I want to come to is actually something, I want to come to the point, your work is so about nature, also technical, but then you do achieve a moment of being spiritual. You shared that little story with the sun. Would you share that with the audience?
Yeah, I think you spoke so well about Iceland. So first I want to just thank you for that, Klaus. So like a little promo for Iceland. So I think you should all go there. The financial crisis needs you, blah blah blah. And so
very cheap flights.
But I'm also I'm very serious. I'm again and again touched by Iceland. Touched in a way where I'm sort of working on something, and then I'm trying to figure out what do I think. And then you go to Iceland, and then you kind of feel how the landscape is verbalizing it for you, right? So you go like, oh, now I know what I'm thinking, right? So that's why a great landscape, and I guess it doesn't only work with Iceland, but I recommend Iceland for that also. So the point is, you know, you come to a landscape, if you don't mind me dwelling on what you said on it. So you come to a landscape, right? So you look at the landscape, you go, oh, bloody hell. Yeah, or the moon maybe, right? So like, oh, look at this, no trees, like nothing going on. There's nothing where the wind can catch it so that it makes a sound. So you have this kind of windy day, but there's no sounds. And you go like, oh, very, very strange. Nothing indicates scale. So you look at the mountains in front of you and you go, I wonder whether that mountain is 2 days or 2 hours away. And you just go like, what is this? And this is such an interesting, because you're trying to synchronize your body. And you go like, oh, my limbs, I wonder whether my arm is 2 meters or half a meter. Do you know what I mean? But once you start walking, the one mountain gets very close, fast, and the other one just stays on the horizon. And you realize, oh, it's a small mountain and a big mountain. It's not just 2 mountains. And that means the walking, the physicality, becomes a spatial indicator. And if you're lucky, like you said, you see a waterfall, or you see waterfall everywhere, right? So you look at the waterfall, and the waterfall falls with a certain speed. That's what they do. And subconsciously, we can tell the distance to the waterfall by looking at the speed of the falling water. So if it's falling very slow, it's a big waterfall far away. So if it falls fast, it's a small waterfall close by. So if you have a landscape and you go like this, what am I looking at? And then you have a waterfall, you go, oh, now I get scale. So the waterfall becomes your body. It becomes a way of measuring, and the landscape turns around, and you become the landscape, and landscape becomes you, right, through the waterfall. That's why I think waterfalls are exotic. It was a slightly exotic way of describing it, but I really think it's a fantastic place to kind of synchronize your motoric brain, right? So kind of the way the body, the mind, and the space is actually working. And what is important is, yes, I totally enjoy spirituality in the sense that I'm not at all, spiritual. I've always been very careful with esoterics. I've become a little less careful lately because I think there's so much anthroposophic, knowledge in the world which has been marginalized, and we need to treasure and take the marginalized people to the center because they're much better at many things compared to the people at the center, right? So I have more confidence in the periphery slowly, and so on and so forth. But basically, what you talked about is that over the years working as an artist, and now we spoke a little bit about the start. Over the years, I also grew confident that the world in which we work, called the art world, despite all its elitism and exclusivity, it has something incredibly valuable. It has something that I think is very, very powerful in today's world. Interestingly, I think people's confidence in the world is, struggling a bit. So look at the political systems, and where we have populism, nationalism, chauvinism, all kind of mismanagement, politically speaking, where democracies are kind of really on a roller coaster whether they are working or not. That's of course nothing compared to the financial sector. So we have the financial sector. It's like kind of totally untrustworthy, if you ask me. So we have financial sector where a bank gets like $500 trillion to kind of save itself, but it doesn't borrow $500 to a person on the street. So like a huge discomforting sort of trust. So and so on and so forth. So think about religion, right? So religion is like totally wild out there, being exclusive and so on and so forth, and wars. And so think about the art. Right? Think about the world in which we work, and I know it's a little more complex, but think about it, without actually doing much, we look pretty good, right? Because everybody else is doing
sure.
Now, but I think we look good in terms of what art can do with regards to the creative way of turning things, or turning thinking into doing. We have something valuable. And, if you think about politics, there's like no relationship between thinking and doing. And making a work of art, I think this is why I'm so interested in this Little Sun project. Making a work of art is actually also showing the way, how can you take an idea that is about the world and is about shaping the world, and you shape it, and by shaping it, you also shape the world. See, that's for every work of art. When you make a painting, you're not making a painting of the world, you're painting the bloody world. I mean, you are a reality machine, you could say. So I've gained increasingly confidence in this idea that what we have is actually worth something. And that's why I was so excited about your exhibition at MoMA PS1, because it's very much about having confidence in the art being capable of turning realities around. And of course, this is not so new, but with regards to this project, where I'm literally working quite far away from the sort of high street of the art world, and maybe it's only fair that I explain it very quickly. This is very much also about testing whether art carries its, can it work even far away from Miami Basel Art Fair. So let me tell you one thing. So I was testing the very early stage as this. It's a little solar lantern with a solar panel. It has an LED light on the inside here, and then rechargeable batteries. So you have around 900 charges, which if you charge it almost every day, it's about 3 years. It has 40 times more light than a candle, 20 times more than a kerosene or petroleum lamp, and so on and so forth. So
and is it art, or is it a functioning object?
Well, that's now the question. I was testing it south of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia with an elderly woman who was, I was discussing whether or not her grandchildren could make some use of it. And I was explaining it, and she of course said, oh, that's great, they can do their homework without sitting next to an oil lamp because it's very unhealthy and polluting and so on. And then I said, to make a long story short, and then it's a work of art. And then she looked at me and she said, what do you mean it's a work of art? I said, it's a work of art. And then she looked at it for a long time and said, No, do you mean like in the church? And I didn't see that answer coming, so I was like, in the church? And then I said, yes, why not? Let's just cash in on that one too, right? It is like in the church, I said. And then she said, oh, but that's amazing, it's fantastic. So the idea of functionality just like it just got much more complex. And I know it's a sort of a slightly more complex terrain, but generally speaking, I do think creativity, and if we just say, or we say art, I do think it is capable of addressing emotional principles which are much stronger than the general top-down functional way of user-driven market economy. So I'm trying with this to create a language and an awareness of policy making or social entrepreneuring, if you want, create a language where it becomes about what do we share. And of course we share structure and functionality and pragmatism and quantifiability, but we also share emotional desire, spirituality, if you want. We share hope. We want to be happy, we want to be connected, we want to feel
where does Olafur the artist stop and Olafur the activist start? Do you make a differentiation? I want to talk about two things that I think are borderline, not you borderline as a character, but borderline in terms of your art practice. Doing this, and I know you're spending an incredible amount of your time and your creativity and your energies, even you only have 24 hours a day, but you're spending a lot with this little son, and I'm always wondering, perhaps you should better work on your career and do a big exhibition. But then you're also designing an opera house, or I want to touch on two things. One is your school idea, because you say, I have nothing to do with Joseph Beuys, those crazy German artists, I'm closer to Irvin or James Turrell. But then in the end, 20 years later, perhaps education, teaching became something that's actually in your work. And I want to talk about something, and I'm not even sure if you want to talk about it. Would you mind sharing like 3 words about the orphanage? Or if you mind, then don't talk about it. I'm just trying to get to that point where Olafur, where you as a person start or end, and you as an artist start or end, or if that is all one, and therefore...
Yeah, it's an interesting question. For me, it's all connected because I'm one person. So I normally don't say, okay, 3 o'clock, I'm another person, and 5 o'clock, I'm another person. So your values, you can change your values into variating languages. One can sing, make a poem, make a film, make a work of art, one can speak, one can do this and that, but essentially it's all about the same values. The thing is, though, that I just need to kind of not forget what you asked me.
I won't forget, don't worry.
But the artist and the activist, I would never polarize the two, because I thought the rainbow I did in the 90s, I thought beauty can be fierce. Fearful beauty, if you want to look at it this way. Beauty can be scary also. So for me, that was... in terms of addressing the need to understand that there are differences in the way we see things, and to celebrate the fact that we can be in the same space and not have the same opinion. That's a very political idea. I mean, we want democracies to be about that, to be, disagreeing on disagreeing. And now we have so much populism that is almost, dying out, and people are, and so on. So anyway, I normally would say that within my, compulsory obsessive work, if you look at me at least, I think it has, not a direct but an indirect political address due to the ideas of what is values and how do we turn values, our thinking and talking and knowing, into actually doing.
Can we be a bit more concrete, and would you mind saying 3 sentences explaining the orphanage?
Oh yeah, so one thing, but I did then some years ago, some 6, 8, 9 years ago, a Louis Vuitton project where I got a bit of money, and I thought, why don't I try to connect that incredibly high end of a global brand, with all the complexities that comes with that, with something which is at the very other end, such as child rights issues in Ethiopia. I had myself adopted with my wife 2 children from Ethiopia, and we have gotten, should I say, a faith destiny overlap with our children. And very quickly we realized, oh, with the talent that you have from the art world, like, so I think we must not underestimate, if you can do a Biennale in Venice, if you can do a show in Paris, or a show in Italy, like if you can do a show in Italy, then you can do anything, anywhere, right? And this is so interesting. So as
we love Italy.
No, but you know, as an artist, it's very interesting. You have a lot of skills. You can get a screwdriver in places where there is no screwdriver for sure around. And so this means that when I went to Ethiopia, I realized, oh, it's very easy. I can very quickly do something here. And of course, I was very naive and made many mistakes, but slowly I got better and better. So for some years now, with the money that I took from Louis Vuitton and put it into a foundation and blah, 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 it was a few $1 million, and we sold a work of art and made a little tralala out of it. That money, we have facilitated an orphanage where we have we do infant trauma management, and we train caretakers from other orphanages in infant trauma management. So we have a focus on 6 to 3-year-old babies which are suffering from high degree of post-traumatic stress. And we're doing quite well. Of course, it's also very difficult and so on and so forth. But we're also working with the High Court in Ethiopia, where we represent the children in a non-traumatizing way. So these are kind of small special...
Where is the orphanage?
It's in Addis Ababa.
And how many people, how many orphans are in there?
Oh, but so our orphanage, it's called a transit orphanage. So we never have more than 6 or 8 or 10 kids at the orphanage. And it's a little bit like the focus is on, you know, the therapeutic address. And the kids are typically with us while there's a court case, or while because the parents have gotten to jail, or they've been lost, or they've been found, or whatever. And these kids then are spending some time with us until they are, legally speaking, you know, being put into other systems. That can be to family, return to biological family, you know, sort of a host family, a sponsor family, or into international adoption, or something like this.
How many people work in the orphanage?
So the staff is 14 people, and 16 with everybody, and we rotate. You know, we educate. It's a great thing. We educate all the staff from all the other orphanages, and slowly we get, you know, very friendly with all the. So we get a kind of knowledge of what's going on the streets. Now we're trying to take that knowledge and, you know, bring it to the government, which obviously is not working at all. But generally speaking, it's become a pretty unique. It's a micro-organization, right? So
how often are you there? Because you're super busy, you're a world-famous artist, you're jetting around, and you have exhibition offers and inquiries, and you're also compulsively curious and restless. And I know you want to change the world with your art, but how much time do you spend there?
So I go, I think, well, I just actually started teaching at the Addis Ababa University for Arts. I took a professorship there. I have to go and sign. I go, I think, 4 or 5 times a year. My wife goes 4 or 5 times a year. Once a month, every second month, we are there. But, you know, the thing is, then I start getting involved with the art school. Then there is an amazing gallery, Nesta Art Village is called, a collective. Then I get involved with that. They were all visiting Berlin. They were teaching and working at my school in Berlin. I went with my students from my school in Berlin 2 months. I wasn't there for 2 months, but I made the students stay for 2 months in Addis Ababa, which was like amazing to be 2 months in Addis Ababa. So it's not just, you know, the orphanage and then me working with you. Like this, as all one thing, and you know.
But is the orphanage a work of art?
No, I would never say that. But the thing is that the research in the orphanage with regards to trauma management, and you're reading about the famous French psychologist called Eliasson on speech or verbal therapy for children before they have a language. Like from 70s, a famous psychologist from France. And that is so much about, you know, identification pattern, cognitive development, very early stages of neuro/social skills, you know, how language and body and your ability to be empathic influences you higher in life. So that is so close to art.
We had a conversation yesterday. We wanted to prepare today, and then we got sidetracked and carried away by interesting topics, so we didn't really talk about today, but we talked about more life in general. And you asked me, could you imagine whatever working in this museum or there? And I basically said, oh, I could actually imagine if somebody asked me, would you take over Greenpeace? And I said, oh, wow, that would be actually really interesting. It's the same thought you had as an artist being in Italy. You find a screwdriver and you're turning a church into an experience of waterfalls or fire or ice or glacier. So you know as an artist you can organize everything. And what we recently did, we got an 850-year-old glacier piece from Iceland to New York, and we kept it there so you can do all these things. And so as a curator, you are just on the more administrative side of this, but still, so when you teach and when you have your school in Berlin, which you unfortunately now are wrapping up, it's not kind of like you're mutating into this Joseph Beuys-like professor. You are going through this as a transition. When you talk to young artists, would you not rather tell them, oh, don't make the detour about being an artist, just start immediately as an activist or start immediately working in the real world? What do you tell the artist? Because you yourself maneuver so freely between all these areas in society.
Well, you're very right, Klaus, and it's a very good question, and one I'm working on a lot. And of course now, having spent 20 years in Germany, I've come to appreciate Beuys in a very different way. And the school, which is at the University of Berlin, the school is, the University of Berlin hired me for 5 years on a science grant where I was allowed to run the department inside or upstairs from my studio. And my interest in this school was very much about educational methodology. And especially as I've been sort of visiting a lot of schools, kind of doing workshops or teaching, there seems to be sort of sneaking into the schools a kind of formula-driven how to produce an artist, especially in schools where they pay maybe $100,000 to be an artist. Then the school better have some quantifiable proof that you actually come out as an artist at the end. So the idea of a more experimental school where we took in social science and spatial science, such as architecture and kind of natural spatial sciences, such as cosmology, into the school as a teaching. And then I hired a architectural historian and a cultural historian and an architecture historian to co-teach at the school with me. So it was a kind of interdisciplinary school with a main focus on art. And, you know, frankly speaking, yeah, you know, I'm sure I'm the one that learned the most because they were so talented, the young people. And in a funny way, they are also traumatized. I mean, having to choose to be an artist, first of all, is a traumatizing choice. So it's a little bit like doing post-traumatic stress when you have a school, because you're kind of having to bring them back into having confidence in taking a risk. Right? So they go out in Berlin or in New York or wherever, and they very quickly say, oh, I'm not going to take any risk because I see a road and I'm just going to stick to that road. So and you know, obviously I wasn't right the whole time, but what I very much focused on is how to make them having confidence in actually thinking for themselves. And yeah, I'm ending it now after 5 years. The grant I got runs out. It's great because I can show the bloody other German professors that you can actually also stop a school instead of spending your lifetime as a kind of sort of a zombie at all these academies. They're all full of these, no offense, but you know. So it's also important to kind of start with some glamour and then end it with a really, you know, fantastic ending, right? So it's a new beginning.
We are at a fair, art fair, and I used to always get headaches at art fairs. So I actually had to basically either run through or go around the building because there's so many objects crammed into little spaces, and I think that's perhaps a professional disease as a curator. It's like, just imagine you're a camera and you're always focusing on things, but you have so many things. So you're like this camera lens focusing on this and that and this and this and this. And this immediately created a headache because I tried to focus on everything and you can't, metaphorically or literally. So an art fair is little spaces, and there are objects, 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 and they're all sellable objects, and they're kind of too close to each other, and they are like literally like this, basically aesthetically, and these should all be objects that somehow carry some truth or beauty or eternal truth and beauty, and then you just put them all together. It's like truth and beauty. It's like, so are you an object maker? Can you live in the logic of an art fair? What's your visceral reaction going through a fair like here?
Well, I think besides being a professional, which gives you some, let's say, ability to kind of map things so you can know that there is something else than the art fairs. Of course, it makes you numb. It nummifies you, and maybe we are nummified or mummified actually in a way which we don't notice, because we start to take things for granted, and our critique or subversive way of seeing, the way we can also criticize the seeing, isn't really facilitated. So of course it's a balancing act. I don't think we are really the ones who are suffering. The challenge is much bigger. There's so many people coming here who thinks this is a museum. And they think, because there's curators everywhere, like sitting here talking like you are now, Klaus, but and in a certain way, people who are not professionals, but who are maybe even more interesting than professionals, they are, they think they are actually visiting an art fair or an art show. And they are not. They're visiting a trade fair with trades with art. And there's a discrepancy in responsibility with regards to the fair being able to say this to people. Listen, it's not an exhibition, it's a trade fair, and we trade art, right? If you want to see an exhibition, why don't you go to a museum or actually to the gallery? All of these galleries have much better exhibitions in the galleries that they have at the booth. But still, 80% of their visibility, especially these fantastic galleries from Bogota. I mean, so think of the exposure they have here and then in Bogota. So this, I think, is much more threatening for the people who come and think, oh, interesting gallery from Bogota. This is not Bogota. This is bloody fucking Miami, right? And so I'm not so worried about us two, Klaus, because we are mummified for many years already. But I'm more worried about the kids. The kids who come in and they love art, and then they get this.
What about? I think we all hear you. If you think about content...
We have a last question.
Oh, we have...
last question. Oh, great. Yeah.
Oh, I thought, wasn't that the 24-hour talk? No.
Oh, great.
No, we don't.
We're so on time.
You look very scared. One last question. Last question is, when I think about the young artist Olafur Eliasson showing at Goethestraße, and there was a rock, and there was... the light projector and all of these pieces, and you were referring to Irvin, James Turrell, and recently, as I said, our last bigger project was the glacier from Iceland that we somehow successfully got to New York and kept cold. Talk a bit about, and I'm not saying missionary, talk a bit about content, because I think in the beginning of your career, you were much, much more careful to, I would nearly say, hide. You were hiding behind the form. When I first met you, you were nearly a formalist, and I'm saying this very respectful, but I felt you were hiding very much behind that very accomplished, explainable form. You said this is, and you have this whole structure, you have a vocabulary, you have a very clear vocabulary and a dictionary and a grammar. So you really developed that language, visual language. I think you are much less shy to talk about content.
I was just a little less eloquent, but it was the same, the way I see it. But I think also I have come to understand that I've come to grow more confident in what art is, what abstraction is capable of. So I see something abstract and I see incredible potential. And then I'm looking at it with somebody and they say, what? And I said, but look, this is amazing. So for some reason I've gained so much trust in the fact that if you just have confidence in art, you can do anything. And that might be spiritual or pragmatic or either way. And but there is a kind of inside of that, inside of something abstract, there is the relationship between something that we know, and that might be not knowing but feeling also, and then something that we physically experience. So my work was in a way always about that. What's the discrepancy between what I know? I see the eyes, I go, aha, eyes, oh, very easy to understand, from a distance even. Then I go and look at it, and then I touch and say, oh, it's cold. And this tiny little sort of touch that my brain connected with my hand is, I think, very important, because the glaciers are, as we know, behaving very strange, melting very fast. But and it's funny how that knowing and how that feels on your hand is totally disconnected. And I'm not being missionary in the sense that I'm telling you to go and bloody touch the eyes and then you will see what happened. But just the fact that we also, I think, need to understand that having a body has consequences. Like, we forget sometimes that physical presence is also very closely related to our social skills, to empathic skills, compassion. And I do think it all ties into this a question about how does the world feel. See, now that's very much also what the old works were about. The Moss Wall. How on earth does the wall feel? No, the world feel. Yeah, wall and world. And this, I think, is very important to also treasure, because that is very quickly lost, especially at an art fair. And so we know what the art fair is. So, but anyway, this idea of being touched, and maybe we can end with that, because I think we spoke about it. When we are touched, it's very often in touching, right? So being touched is never just like kind of consuming, and then I'm touched. No, touch is always related to I'm doing something. I'm reading a book. I'm looking at I'm actively looking at a theater play maybe. But being touched, I think, is not suddenly experiencing something you did not know. Being touched is, as I kind of said a little bit before, it's being assisted in verbalizing something that you felt, but you haven't quite verbalized it yet. And I do think, the art is so fantastic that can even happen at an art fair. Like, disregarding all the noise at an art fair, you can still see a work of art and be touched. It's amazing. It just shows how strong art is to even be creative in the context of a fair. And that's, I think, something that I'm very interested in. And for me, that was both, I just hadn't figured out a way of talking so much about it. And then again, I'm also not so sure that talking about it really adds anything to how that eyes feels, because the talk is very close to the knowing, and the feeling is very difficult to the physical, the having a body is very hard to talk about, because language and semantics and brains seem to be very self-occupied. But that's why being a curator comes with a great responsibility, and doing shows like the projects at the Rockaway after Sandy is incredibly important, and I really respect you for that, Klaus. So,
full circle. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
everybody.